Next up, I want to go ahead and test our functionality. Specifically, I want to make sure that our user model is valid, and I want to also write a test to make sure a user can log in and create an account. And before we go ahead and do that, we need to actually update this user's fixture here. Because if I were to go ahead and just run our test suite, it would actually break. You can see this error here. And that's because the fixtures that were generated with devise don't actually account for how a user should be built. So a user needs to have an email and a password, for example, but this fixture doesn't account for any of that. It's just a blank record. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm actually just going to reference this Stack Overflow answer. So I'm going to copy this to save some time, but I'll just do user1 at example.com just to change it up a bit. We don't have a name column and we don't have an admin column. And actually I'm going to change this to 1 and I'm going to change it to confirmed user. And I'm going to add a confirmed at column, or key rather, and I'm going to set it to time.zone.now. And what that does is, because if you remember in the last two lessons, we set it up so that a user needs to confirm their email address before they can actually access the application, and that's what this column is for. So I have that in here, and this encrypted password column or key needs to use this special devise class or method here, and that just sets the password. So what we can do here, if you run Rails test again, the test suite should pass, so this is good. So now we can actually go ahead and write a simple test for our user model. And to do this, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. So first we can do a setup block here, and I'm going to instantiate a new user model and just say user.new email, and we need to make sure we keep it unique. So if I were to actually go in here and set the user email to this model would actually be invalid because emails need to be unique. So I'm going to just do unique at example.com, and we'll set the password here. Okay, so that's our setup block, and now that will just make it so in our tests we can always access this instance variable here. And I'm just going to make a super simple test that's going to say should be valid. And you might be thinking, like, why would you go ahead and make such a kind of contrived simple test? Like, that we already know that this is going to be valid. We already were able to log in and out of the application. And it's really just good practice to do this more so for catching any regressions later on in the application. So if I ever update the user model, which is more than likely to actually happen with this app, I want to make sure that I am catching any breaking changes, and doing a simple test like this is helpful. So then we can just do assert, and we want to assert that the user is valid. And I'm getting all of this from the Rails testing guides, which I can actually pull up here. So there's all these different assertions. So I'm getting it from specifically right here, this available assertion. So assert and then .valid, that's a method that comes with active record. So this is basically saying this should return true. So if we go in here and run Rails, and I can actually isolate this test. So that passed. So this is good. I'm actually going to go ahead and save this. So update user fixtures and test user validations. The next thing I want to do is actually write a test that will automatically log in to the application and also test that a user can create an account. So to do this, I'm going to actually run a systems test. So you can do Rails G, and I think it's system test. Let me actually check that. Yep. And I'll just actually keep it consistent. So with the example here, so I'm going to call it users. Okay, and this created this test file here. So what I'm going to do is write my own test. So test should register. And for this, I guess before I go too far, so system testing, you can read this in the Rails guides, but it uses a gem called Capybara, which is kind of a funny name. And we're also going to be using Headless Chrome. So I changed this earlier. It used to be just Chrome, but Headless Chrome means it won't actually open up a Google Chrome browser. It'll just use the API behind the scenes. But what's cool is that it's actually using a real browser. So it simulates like if a user were to actually follow these steps. And I'm trying to see if there's some examples in here. So for example, there's this method called visit that's from Capybara. So I'm going to go ahead and do visit, and actually I always forget the name of some of these paths. So visit new registration path, and then actually what I'm going to do, and this might seem kind of silly, but I'm actually going to open up my application to see what the markup looks like rather than guess and get it wrong. And that's just so I can write this test correctly from the start. But I know it's going to be something like fill in email with, we'll do like unique at example.com. Fill in password with password. Okay, and password confirmation. And the reason I spun up the app is because the labels matter. So I want to make sure I have that right. And then finally we want to have click button sign up. And this should pass, but I also want to make sure this creates a new user. So I think I can do assert difference user.count. And I can wrap that in that block. So let's clear this out. Okay, so we actually get an error here, and it takes a screenshot for us. So let's see what that looks like. Sign up. So it says it couldn't find a button that says sign up. Oh, you know why? It's because I capitalized it in the test, but it's lowercase in there. And what's cool though is that actually, like I just showed you, it takes a screenshot so you can see what the browser saw. And I also spelled example wrong too. Not that that matters. So just make that lowercase. And I realize this is kind of like brittle a little, and it's may not be completely necessary. It could be a little overkill, but I really want to make sure that users can actually register on the site. So let's run this test again. Okay, now we're getting a different error here. Missing host link to. Okay, so this is a new error. Missing host link to. Okay, so I think I figured out what the problem is. Earlier we added this default URL options in here, and that was for development. We also did it for production. I think what I need to actually do is add that for test. So let's see if that works. So let's see if this will successfully run. Okay, cool. And I think that's because in our test, we're still firing off an email, a confirmation email. But because we didn't have this line in here, that was causing that error. So that's good. The next thing I want to do is also just test that a user can sign in. So for this, I'm going to go, let's copy this new user session path, go to my test, and I'm going to do visit new user session path, and then just to make sure I get it all right, let's have email and password. So, but in this case, what we actually want to do is we want to get the, and I'll do this actually in a setup block, because we want to use an existing user. So we want to do @user equals users, and we want to get that from right here. So this is why we set up this fixture in the first place. So users, confirmed user, and now we have access to this particular user. So email with user.email and fill in password with password. And I'm getting that from right here. And the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that there was a success message on the page somewhere. And the next thing we want to do is assert that we were signed in successfully. So I think we can do assert. We actually find, do something like this. I think this should work. Now this might be a little brittle. We might have to change this later, like if there's more than one paragraph tag on the page. This could fail, but for now, let's just give this a shot. Okay, so it looked like this failed. Let's see what the screenshot has to say about this. Oh, you know why? Because I never actually clicked login. So I'm just filling that in, but I'm never actually doing anything. So we want to do click button. Let's make sure I get the case right. So login. Clear that out. Run the test again. And I realize this is kind of tedious, and you're probably thinking this is causing more work than it's worth. And there's a case to be made for that. But what this will do is in the future, it's just going to make sure that the login page works and that people can still register. And that will help save time in the long run because I don't have to worry about manually doing that when I make different changes to the application. Okay, and that passed. So we're in good shape. I'm going to go ahead and add this. So test user registration and sign in. And we'll push that up, and that seems like a good place to leave off for now.